Cancel your credit cards and get out of here. Now! The phone repair technician's urgent whisper changed everything I thought I knew about my family. In that moment, standing in that cramped little shop on Union Avenue, my world collapsed. Hello, my name is Brian Mitchell. I'm 61 years old, and I live in Memphis, Tennessee. For 40 years, I worked at the same furniture factory before retiring last spring with a decent pension and savings. Not rich by any means, but comfortable enough to enjoy my golden years with my wife Linda, who passed away 3 years ago from breast cancer. After Linda died, our son Kevin and his wife Melissa suggested they move in with me to help out. I was grateful at first. The big Craftsman house on South Parkway East felt too empty with Linda gone. Kevin had always been our wild child, in and out of jobs, always with some new business idea that never quite materialized. But he was family. And Melissa seemed to bring stability to his life. She was charming, attentive, always insisting on handling my bills and appointments since I wasn't tech-savvy enough. The Memphis summer heat was brutal that August day. The kind of heat that makes the air shimmer above the pavement and turns car seats into branding irons. I was sitting on my covered porch, watching neighborhood kids playing through sprinklers when Melissa hurried out, flustered. Brian, I'm so sorry to bother you, but my phone's acting up, and I'm expecting an important call about a job interview, she said, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. Could you take it to that repair shop on Union while I finish getting ready? They know me there. I didn't mind the errand. Retirement sometimes felt too quiet, especially with Kevin always networking somewhere downtown and Melissa busy with her job search. The drive would do me good. The repair shop was wedged between a barbecue joint and a pawn shop, with neon signs advertising fast repairs and cash for phones. The air conditioning inside was a blessed relief from the Memphis humidity. The young man at the counter, name tag reading Marcus, had tattoos covering his arms and a piercing through his eyebrow. How can I help you, sir? He asked, taking Melissa's phone. My daughter-in-law's phone is acting up. She said you know her, Melissa Mitchell? Something changed in Marcus's expression. He glanced at the door, then back at me. Give me a minute, he said, disappearing into a back room with the phone. I waited, absent-mindedly watching a ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead, thinking about the barbecue place next door. Maybe I'd pick up some ribs on the way home. Kevin and Melissa had been talking about taking me to dinner at that new place downtown tonight, something about discussing the future. I assumed they were finally moving out, maybe even had some good news about starting a family. Marcus returned, but instead of handing me the phone, he leaned across the counter and spoke in a low voice. Sir, are you related to Kevin Mitchell? He's my son. Why? Marcus looked uncomfortable. And Melissa is his wife? Yes, that's right. Is something wrong with her phone? His next words froze me to the spot. Sir, I think you need to see something. But first, do you have any joint accounts with them? Credit cards? Investments? Well, yes. Kevin is on my checking account to help with house expenses. And Melissa manages my credit cards online since I'm not good with computers. Why? That's when he said it, words that would replay in my mind for months to come. Cancel your credit cards and get out of here. Now. What? I don't understand. Please, Mr. Mitchell. Go to your bank immediately. Cancel every card, every account they have access to. I can't say more here. He scribbled something on a piece of paper and slid it across the counter. Meet me at this address after work. 6 p.m. I'll explain everything. I took the phone and the paper, confused and suddenly anxious. As I pushed open the door to leave, Marcus called after me. Mr. Mitchell? They're not who you think they are. The Memphis traffic crawled along Union Avenue as my mind raced faster than the cars around me. What did he mean? What had he seen on Melissa's phone? The bank was only 3 blocks away, and without really deciding to, I found myself pulling into its parking lot. As I sat in my car, hands trembling on the steering wheel, I remembered the way Kevin and Melissa had been whispering lately, falling silent when I entered rooms. The strange calls Kevin took outside on the porch. Melissa's sudden interest in my financial papers, claiming she was organizing them. A cold knot formed in my stomach as I realized I hadn't seen a statement from any of my accounts in months. "We've gone paperless," Melissa had explained. "It's all online now. I'll keep track of everything." I grabbed my wallet and walked into the bank, still not fully believing I was doing this. But something in Marcus's eyes, a genuine concern and urgency, pushed me forward. "I'd like to check my accounts," I told the teller, a young woman with a kind smile. "All of them. And I think I may have been compromised." Her smile faded as she typed on her computer. Then she looked up at me, her expression shifting to concern. "Mr. Mitchell, could you please come with me to speak with our manager?" That's when I knew something was very wrong. As I followed her to a small office in the back, I felt as though I were walking through a nightmare, that peculiar sensation of moving through molasses while your mind screams at you to run. The bank manager, a middle-aged woman with steel-rimmed glasses, gestured for me to sit down. "Mr. Mitchell, when was the last time you reviewed your accounts? My daughter-in-law handles that now. Since my wife passed." She nodded slowly. "I'm afraid I have some concerning information to share with you." As she turned her computer screen toward me, I saw what was left of 40 years of hard work. My retirement account, nearly empty. My savings, drained through dozens of transfers over the past 3 months. My checking account, barely enough for next week's groceries. "There have been numerous large withdrawals," she explained gently, "all authorized with your information." I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. "This isn't possible. I never." But even as I said it, I knew. The future discussion they wanted to have tonight. The constant secret of conversations. The way they'd been treating me with extra kindness lately, as if fattening me up for slaughter. My own son. And the woman he had brought into our lives. They had been systematically stealing everything I had. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "We need to file a fraud report immediately," she said. "But first, let's make sure they can't take anything else." As she began the process of freezing my accounts and canceling my cards, I sat there numb, still clutching Melissa's phone. The phone that, somehow, contained evidence of their betrayal. The phone that a stranger had used to warn me before it was too late. The truth was still forming in my mind, but I already knew. By the day's end, my relationship with my son would be irreparably changed. And the comfortable retirement I had worked decades for hung in the balance. What I didn't know yet was that this betrayal went even deeper than money. Or that the Memphis phone repair technician had just saved me from a fate far worse than bankruptcy. Before I continue, if this story has touched you so far, please hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps me share more stories like this. The Memphis afternoon had turned oppressive, not just from the heat, but from the weight of what I had just learned. Leaving the bank, I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped away everything inside me except for a raw, pulsing ache. The manager's words still rang in my ears. "Mr. Mitchell, over $230,000 has been transferred out of your account in the last 3 months alone." I sat in my car in the parking lot, air conditioning blasting against my face, but I couldn't stop sweating. Melissa's phone sat on the passenger seat, now feeling like a ticking bomb. What had Marcus seen? What other secrets were hidden in that innocent-looking device? The logical part of me said to drive straight to the police station. file reports, start the process. But another part, the father in me, desperately needed to understand why. Why would Kevin do this? The little boy who once made me a Father's Day card with macaroni and glitter. The teenager I taught to drive in empty parking lots on Sunday mornings. My son. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove, not toward home or the police station, but toward the Mississippi River. I needed to think, and the river had always calmed me. Linda and I used to bring picnics to Tonley Park when Kevin was small. We'd watch the barges and tell our son stories about Mark Twain and riverboat captains. The park was nearly empty on this sweltering afternoon. I found a bench facing the slow-moving water and sat there, feeling ancient and lost. I took out Melissa's phone, turning it over in my hands. The passcode screen mocked me. What would Linda do in this situation? She'd always been the stronger one, the one who could see through people's facades. She would have never let them move in. I whispered to myself, a painful truth settling in my chest. I tried a few obvious combinations, Melissa's birthday, their anniversary date, but the phone remained locked. As I was about to give up, it vibrated in my hand. A text message appeared on the screen. Everything set for tonight? Remember to get him to sign before dinner. Once we have power of attorney, we can finish the transfers and be done with Memphis for good. It was from Kevin. My fingers felt numb as I swiped up to read the message, somehow bypassing the lock screen. There it was, an entire conversation between my son and his wife about their plans. Not just to take my money, but to have me declared incompetent. To take control of everything. The doctor's all set with the evaluation. One message from Melissa read, just get him to the appointment Thursday. One confused episode is all we need on record. What about the house? Kevin had asked. Already lined up a cash buyer. Once we have POA, we can close in 10 days. He'll never know what hit him until we're long gone. I scrolled through weeks of messages, each one cutting deeper than the last. References to pills they'd been putting in my food to make me drowsy and forgetful. Plans for what they called the big payday. Discussions of a nursing facility in Arkansas where, as Kevin put it, they don't ask too many questions if the bills are paid on time. They weren't just stealing from me. They were planning to erase me. The river blurred before me as tears filled my eyes. Not sad tears. These burned with a rage I hadn't felt in decades. I was a fool. A trusting old fool who had welcomed vipers into his home. The phone vibrated again. Another text from Kevin. Dad's still out with your phone? Make sure he doesn't talk to anyone at the repair shop. So they were worried about the repair shop. About what Marcus might have seen. What evidence might be on this phone that even I couldn't access fully. I wiped my eyes and stood up. The numbness was receding, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I checked my watch, nearly 5:30. Marcus would be waiting soon at the address he'd given me. As I walked back to my car, I noticed an older couple strolling hand in hand along the riverfront. They looked about my age, gray-haired and comfortable together, the way Linda and I should have been at this stage of life. A future stolen from us by cancer, and now my financial future stolen by my own blood. The drive to the address Marcus had given me took me to a small coffee shop in Midtown, away from the tourist areas. The kind of local place where Memphians went to escape the heat and the crowds. I spotted Marcus immediately, sitting in a corner booth, still in his work clothes, but without his name tag. Mr. Mitchell, he said, standing as I approached. I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't, I replied, sliding into the booth across from him. But I went to the bank. You were right. He nodded grimly. I figured as much. I'm sorry. What did you see on her phone? How did you know? Marcus looked around, then leaned forward. I recognized them. Both of them. Your son and his wife, they're not who they claim to be. He pulled out his own phone and showed me a news article from St. Louis. The headline read, "Couple wanted for elder fraud scheme." The photos were grainy but unmistakable, Kevin and Melissa. Except in the article, they were Jason and Rebecca Turner. "They've done this before," Marcus explained quietly. "At least 3 times that authorities know of. They find vulnerable seniors, usually recently widowed. Move in. Gain trust. Drain accounts. In the worst case, an elderly man in Knoxville was found abandoned in a nursing home under a false name after they'd taken everything, even his house." My hand shook as I tried to process this. "Kevin is my son. I raised him." Marcus's expression softened. "Sir, I hate to tell you this, but I did some digging after you left the shop. Your real son, Kevin Mitchell, died 15 years ago in a car accident in California. These people, they research their victims thoroughly. They know details about your life that make their stories believable." The coffee shop seemed to tilt around me. Kevin dead? For 15 years? No, that wasn't possible. I would have known. There would have been calls, notifications. "That's not possible," I said firmly. "We lost touch for a few years when he moved west, but he called eventually. Came back about 5 years ago." "Sir, please look at this," Marcus said, sliding a printout across the table. It was a news clipping from a small California paper. A fatal accident on Highway 1. 5 names listed as casualties. Third on the list, Kevin Brian Mitchell, 27, of Memphis, Tennessee. "This is a mistake," I insisted, even as doubt crept in. The Kevin who had returned to my life 5 years ago was different. I'd attributed it to age, to hard living. He didn't remember certain family stories, claimed amnesia from a minor accident. And he'd never quite gotten along with my brother James, avoiding him at family gatherings. A brother who would have immediately recognized an imposter. James, who I'd gradually seen less and less of since. Kevin returned. "These people are professionals, Mr. Mitchell," Marcus continued gently. "They choose marks who are isolated, who don't have many close family connections left. They become whatever their victims need. A returned son, a helpful nephew, a caring neighbor." "How do you know all this?" I asked, suddenly suspicious. Marcus's face hardened. "Because they did the same thing to my grandmother in Nashville last year. By the time we figured it out, they were gone with her life savings. She died 2 months later. The doctors said it was heart failure, but I know it was heartbreak." He paused. "When I saw her phone today, I recognized her methods. The same apps, the same hidden folders. I wasn't sure about him until you confirmed it." I sat back, feeling the world I thought I knew crumbling around me. If this was true, and the evidence was becoming harder to deny, then I had been living with strangers. Criminals. People who had been poisoning me, gaslighting me, preparing to discard me once they'd taken everything. "The dinner tonight," I said slowly. "They want me to sign something. Power of attorney, most likely," Marcus nodded. "It's their usual endgame. Once they have that, they can legally take everything. What should I do?" The question came out smaller than I intended, the voice of a man suddenly adrift. "First, we need to preserve the evidence on this phone," Marcus said, practical now. "I have a friend who's a digital forensics specialist. He can extract everything without leaving traces." He hesitated. "Then, sir, you need to decide. Do you confront them, or do you let the police handle it?" The weight of the decision pressed down on me. Confront the people who had been planning to destroy me? Look into the eyes of the man who had pretended to be my dead son? "I need to see their faces," I said finally. "When they realize I know." Marcus looked concerned. "That could be dangerous. These people, they don't like losing their paydays." I'm not afraid of them, I said, surprised to find it was true. The shock was giving way to a cold anger that felt clarifying. But I won't be stupid. We'll have backup. We made a plan, simple but effective. I would return home, act normally, go to dinner as planned, where a recording device Marcus would provide. Have police officers waiting at the restaurant. Let them think their plan was working, right until the moment the handcuffs came out. As we finished talking, I had one last question. Why did you help me? You could have just reported them anonymously. Marcus was quiet for a moment. After my grandmother died, I promised myself I'd never look the other way again. These people, they steal more than money. They steal dignity, trust. They make you doubt your own mind. He met my eyes directly. No one deserves that, Mr. Mitchell. Especially not someone who's already lost so much. I thought of Linda then, of how fiercely she would have fought to protect our family. Our real family. The son we had raised and lost. The life we had built that these imposters were using as a stage for their cruel performance. As I drove home, rehearsing how to act normal when every nerve in my body was screaming for justice, I realized something important. Today wasn't just about saving what remained of my finances. It was about reclaiming my life, my memories, the truth of who I was and who my family had been. The Memphis evening was settling in, the heat giving way to a purple dusk, as I pulled into the driveway of the house that might not be mine much longer. Through the front window, I could see them moving around the kitchen, preparing for a dinner that would never happen the way they planned. My hand stopped shaking. Whatever came next, whether justice or heartbreak, I would face it standing up, eyes open. For Linda. For the real Kevin. For myself. Before I continue, if this story has touched you so far, please hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps me share more stories like this. The walk from my car to the front door of what I once considered my sanctuary felt like the longest journey of my life. Each step on the familiar cracked concrete path seemed to echo with memories. Linda planting marigolds along the edges, the real Kevin learning to ride his bike here, the countless summer evenings spent on the porch swing discussing dreams and disappointments. Now, those memories were tainted, overlaid with a terrible new understanding. The imposters who had invaded my life didn't just steal my money. They were stealing these precious memories too, corrupting them with their presence. I paused at the door, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for the handle. The small recording device Marcus had given me felt heavy in my shirt pocket. Just act normal, he had advised. Let them think nothing has changed. But everything had changed. The son I thought had returned to me was dead, had been dead for 15 years while I grieved his absence, not knowing I should have been grieving his death. The daughter-in-law I had welcomed was a practiced con artist. My home had become a stage set for their elaborate deception. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Dad, there you are. The man I now knew wasn't Kevin called from the kitchen. We were getting worried. Did you get Melissa's phone fixed? His voice, so familiar and now so strange, sent a chill through me. How had I not seen it? There was nothing of Linda in his features, nothing of me. Just a carefully constructed facade that my desperate loneliness had accepted without question. The, repair shop is backed up, I managed to say, hanging my keys on their hook beside the door. They'll call when it's ready. The woman, not Melissa, never Melissa, appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dishcloth. My late wife's dishcloth. Oh, that's frustrating, she said with practiced sympathy. But hey, perfect timing. Dinner's almost ready, and then we can head downtown for our reservation. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further. How many times had she drugged my food? The text messages I'd seen flash through my mind, pills to make me drowsy, forgetful. Evidence of confusion they could use against me. Actually, I said carefully. I'm not very hungry right now. Maybe I'll just have some water. A flicker of something, annoyance, concern, crossed her face before the pleasant mask returned. You need to eat something, Brian. You know how you get when your blood sugar drops. Another lie. I'd never had problems with my blood sugar. Another fabricated symptom they could point to later. I'll just wash up, I said, moving toward the stairs. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. The eyes that looked back at me were clearer than they'd been in months. Had they been drugging me all this time? Making me foggy compliant? I thought of the special tea Melissa had been brewing for me each night, for my insomnia. The meal she insisted on preparing. The vitamins she'd set out each morning. I emptied my pockets before changing my shirt, wallet, keys, and Melissa's phone. I turned the phone over in my hands, this object that had set today's revelations in motion. On impulse, I tried the most obvious passcode, Kevin's birthday. My Kevin's birthday. The phone unlocked. Of course. They would have researched everything about my real son. Using his birthday as a passcode was both practical and another small cruelty, forcing me to repeatedly commemorate a death I didn't even know had occurred. With shaking hands, I navigated through the phone. Text messages I had already glimpsed. Emails. Photos. Each one a fresh wound. Pictures of them together in places I didn't recognize. St. Louis, Knoxville, other cities where they'd likely run similar scams. Photos of documents, my documents. Bank statements. Property deeds. My will. Then I found something that made my blood freeze. A folder labeled Memphis exit. Inside were detailed plans, flight reservations for tomorrow night to Cancun, correspondence with someone about extended accommodations in a place with no extradition, and most chillingly, forms for a residential care facility in rural Arkansas with my name already filled in. Tomorrow. They were planning to finish this tomorrow. The dinner tonight wasn't just about getting me to sign a power of attorney. It was a farewell dinner. My last night of freedom. A soft knock on the bathroom door made me jump. Brian? The false Melissa's voice came through the door. Are you okay in there? We should leave soon to make our reservation. Just a minute, I called, quickly locking the phone and slipping it back into my pocket. Almost ready. I took a final look in the mirror and made myself a promise. Tonight would indeed be a farewell dinner, but not the one they planned. It would be a farewell to lies, to manipulation, to the twisted perversion of family they had created. Downstairs, the table was set for a light dinner, just enough to get us to the restaurant. I noticed how strategically they'd placed everything. Kevin had poured wine. I never drank wine. Melissa had prepared a small salad for me, already dressed with a vinaigrette that could hide any number of substances. I'm actually not very hungry, I repeated, ignoring the salad. Let's just head to the restaurant. They exchanged a quick glance. You should eat something, Dad, the impostor said. Just a little salad to hold you over. I pushed the plate away gently. I'm fine. Another glance between them, this one longer, more concerned. The plan was going off script. I wasn't behaving as expected. At least have some water, Fake Melissa insisted, pushing a glass toward me. It's so hot out, and you were gone a long time. I looked at the water. Had they already prepared for this contingency? Was there something in that innocuous-looking glass? I thought of the Memphis heat outside, of how a confused elderly man might collapse from dehydration and heat stroke. How convenient that would be for them. I'm really not thirsty, I said, standing up. Shall we go? Don't want to be late. I watched their faces carefully. The man who had stolen my son's identity looked irritated now, the charming mask slipping. "Dad, you're acting strange. Are you feeling okay? Maybe we should reschedule dinner." Of course, they wanted to reschedule. Their careful plans were unraveling. I had gone off script, and they needed time to recalibrate. "No," I said firmly. "I've been looking forward to this dinner. You said you had something important to discuss." "We do," fake Melissa said, her voice honeyed with false concern. "But your health comes first. You seem different today." "Different how?" I challenged, holding her gaze. She faltered. "Just not yourself." "Actually," I said, "I feel more like myself than I have in months." Another quick, worried glance between them. The recording device felt warm against my chest, capturing every word, every telling pause. "Let me drive," the man said, reaching for his keys. "No," I countered, surprising even myself with my firmness. "I'd like to drive. Clear evening, nice drive downtown. It'll do me good." More protestations, more concerned looks, but I held firm. I couldn't risk being in a car they controlled, driven to a location of their choosing rather than the restaurant where Marcus and the police would be waiting. Finally, reluctantly, they agreed. The drive downtown was tense with unspoken questions. I could feel them watching me, reassessing, perhaps wondering if their careful plans had somehow been discovered. The man kept checking his phone, typing quick messages to accomplices, to escape contacts. The woman kept up a stream of cheerful, empty conversation, working hard to maintain the illusion of normalcy. The restaurant was one of Memphis's finest, an elegant place on the river where the wealthy and influential dined. Of course, they had chosen somewhere expensive and public for this final act. Somewhere the staff would remember a kindly older gentleman having a lovely dinner with his caring family before his unfortunate health emergency or confused episode. As we parked and walked toward the entrance, I spotted Marcus sitting on a bench across the street, pretending to wait for a bus. He gave me an imperceptible nod. Everything was in place. The maitre d' greeted us warmly and led us to a private table in a corner with a view of the river. Perfect for their purposes, visible enough to establish an alibi, private enough that no one would overhear our conversation. I wondered how many other elderly victims had been brought to places like this, for meals like this, before their lives were stolen. "Wine, gentlemen?" "Madam?" the server asked after we were seated. "Yes, a bottle of—" the impostor began. "Actually," I interrupted, "I think we should all keep clear heads tonight. Just water for the table." Another flash of annoyance crossed his face before he smiled tightly. "Of course, Dad. Whatever you prefer." The woman reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her touch made my skin crawl, but I forced myself not to pull away. "Brian," she said softly, "Kevin and I have been thinking a lot about your future. About making sure you're taken care of, no matter what happens." "My future," I repeated, meeting her gaze steadily. "That's thoughtful of you." The server returned with water and took our orders. The imposters ordered quickly. They weren't here for the food. I deliberately took my time, asking questions about preparation, ingredients, specials. Each minute that passed was another minute closer to justice. When the server left, the man reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "Dad, we've been worried. You've seemed confused lately. Forgetful. We want to make sure that if anything happens, someone can make decisions for you." "Decisions?" I echoed. "About my money? My house?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "About your care. Your welfare." "I see." I took a sip of water, noting how intently they both watched the movement. "And you think I'm not capable of making those decisions myself?" "It's not that." The woman jumped in. "It's about having protection in place before it's needed. just in case." I looked at them both, these strangers who had invaded my life, who had planned to discard me like trash once they'd taken everything of value. In their eyes, I saw not love or concern but calculation. The cold assessment of how much more they could extract from me before cutting their losses. "Before it's needed," I repeated. "Like tomorrow, perhaps? Or were you thinking of catching the 9:45 p.m. flight to Cancun tonight instead?" The shock on their faces would have been comical under any other circumstances. The woman's hand froze mid-gesture. The man's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" he managed, but his voice had lost its confident edge. I pulled out Melissa's phone and placed it on the table between us. "You should be more careful with your passcodes, and your text messages, and your flight reservations." The woman lunged for the phone, but I pulled it back quickly. "Aw," I said. "This isn't yours anymore. In fact, I'm not sure anything here is what it seems." I leaned forward. "Including you, Jason. Or should I call you by whatever your real name is?" The blood drained from his face. "Dad, you're confused. I'm Kevin, your son. My son," I said quietly, "died 15 years ago in California. I just didn't know it until today." The woman started to stand. "Brian, you're having one of your episodes. We should get you home. Sit down." My voice carried an authority I hadn't felt in years. To my surprise, she obeyed. "The only episode happening here is the final episode of your little performance. It's been quite a show, but I'm afraid it's been canceled." The man's expression hardened. The pretense was crumbling fast. "You don't know what you're talking about, old man. You have no proof of anything." I tapped my chest where the recording device lay hidden. "Actually, I have quite a lot of proof, including this entire conversation, and everything you've said in the house for the past several hours." His eyes widened, then narrowed dangerously. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket. "I wouldn't," I said calmly. "Look around." For the first time, they seemed to notice the other diners and nearby tables, all plainclothes police officers who had been quietly watching our drama unfold. As realization dawned, the man made a sudden move to stand, perhaps thinking he could still escape. He didn't make it 2 steps before officers converged from all directions. "Jason Turner and Rebecca Turner," one officer announced loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "You're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping." The look of hatred the man shot me, as handcuffs were placed on his wrists, would have terrified me just this morning. Now, it only confirmed what I already knew. There had never been love there, only calculation and greed. "You'll regret this," he hissed as they led him away. "We have friends. People who can find you." I stood to my full height, looking him directly in the eyes. "My name is Brian Mitchell. I worked 40 years in a furniture factory. I loved my wife until the day cancer took her from me. I mourned my son even when I didn't know he was gone. I am not afraid of you." As they were led away, Marcus appeared at my side. "You did it, Mr. Mitchell. You were incredibly brave." I watched the police cars pull away, red and blue lights flashing against the darkening Memphis sky. The Mississippi flowed on behind us, indifferent to human drama, just as it had for thousands of years. "Not brave," I said quietly. "Just tired of being a ghost in my own life." The adrenaline that had carried me through the day was fading, leaving behind an exhaustion that seemed to seep into my bones. But beneath that exhaustion was something else, a fragile, tentative feeling I hadn't experienced in a very long time. It felt, strangely enough, like the beginning of something rather than the end. Like waking up after a long, troubled sleep. Marcus drove me home that night, to a house that felt both eerily empty and somehow cleaner without their presence. As he left, promising to check on me the next day, I found myself standing in the hallway, looking at family photographs I had barely noticed in months. Linda's smile. The real Kevin's graduation picture. My brother James, whom I hadn't spoken to in far too long. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I should have called years ago. "James," I said when he answered, my voice breaking slightly. "It's Brian. I have something to tell you. About Kevin. About everything." The healing, I knew, would not be quick or easy. The financial damage was extensive. The emotional wounds were deeper still. But as I spoke to my brother for the first time in years, telling him the impossible, painful truth, I felt something inside me begin to stir. Linda had always told me, "The only way past the pain is through it." Tonight, I had taken the first steps through. Tomorrow would bring police statements, bank investigations, and the long process of reclaiming what could be reclaimed. But it would also bring something the imposters had nearly stolen forever: my truth, my dignity, my life. The Memphis night settled around the old Craftsman house on South Parkway East as I finally allowed myself to weep. For my dead son, for lost years, for the cruelty of strangers who would prey on grief and loneliness. But also, quietly, for the first fragile moments of freedom. Before I continue, if this story has touched you so far, please hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps me share more stories like this. The following morning arrived with a particular kind of stillness that only comes after life-altering revelations. Sunlight filtered through the blinds of my bedroom, blinds Linda had picked out years ago, casting soft golden lines across the floor. For the first time in months, I had slept without the special tea the imposters had been serving me. My head felt clearer, sharper, though my heart remained heavy with the weight of everything I had discovered. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my fingers over the wedding ring I still wore. "Linda," I whispered to the empty room, "I wish you were here to help me make sense of all this." The house creaked and settled around me, suddenly too big and too empty. Without the constant presence of the false Kevin and Melissa, the silence felt both liberating and terrifying. Freedom, I was discovering, can be its own kind of burden when you've forgotten how to carry it. My morning routine felt strange without their hovering presence. No Melissa setting out drugged vitamins. No Kevin asking pointed questions about my accounts or suggesting I was forgetting things. Just me in a house full of memories, both real and fabricated. As I made my own coffee, simple, black, the way I'd always preferred it before they convinced me I needed cream and sugar for calcium, my phone rang. Detective Simmons, the officer who had taken my statement last night. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice professional but kind, "I wanted to update you. We executed a search warrant on your home early this morning. CSI is still processing evidence, but I wanted you to know we found quite a lot that will help build the case." I sipped my coffee, listening as she detailed their findings: hidden cameras in the living room and my bedroom, recording devices, a small pharmacy of drugs in Melissa's toiletry bag, financial documents with forged signatures, and multiple sets of identification cards with different names. "They were very thorough," Detective Simmons concluded. "But so are we. And Mr. Mitchell? We've tentatively identified at least 2 other victims in Tennessee and 1 in Mississippi. You aren't alone in this." Not alone. The word struck me with unexpected force. Somewhere out there were other elderly men and women who had lived through this same nightmare, or perhaps hadn't survived it at all. "The other victims," I asked quietly, "were they all right? After?" A pause on the line. "Some have recovered financially, at least partially. Emotionally, it takes time, Mr. Mitchell. But they're survivors. Just like you." After we hung up, I walked through the house, seeing it through new eyes. The subtle changes they had made, moving furniture slightly to make navigating the rooms more difficult, replacing family photos with ones that included the imposter, reorganizing the kitchen so I could never quite find what I was looking for without asking for help. All part of their careful campaign to make me doubt myself, to create the impression of a confused, declining old man. In the study, I found a stack of mail they had intercepted, birthday cards from old colleagues, a newsletter from my union, medical test results they had hidden from me. And buried beneath them all, a letter from a law firm in California dated 14 months ago. The envelope had been opened and resealed. With trembling hands I read, "Dear Mr. Mitchell, we regret to inform you that during routine file review, we discovered an unresolved matter regarding the estate of your late son, Kevin Brian Mitchell. Our records indicate that notification of his passing in 2010 was sent to your previous address in Memphis, but was returned as undeliverable. A small insurance policy naming you as beneficiary remains unclaimed. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss this matter." The letter continued with details about documentation needed, contact information, expressions of belated condolences. But I could barely focus on the words through the tears that blurred my vision. They had known. They had intercepted this letter, used its information to craft their deception, then hidden it from me, denying me even the dignity of knowing my son was gone, of properly mourning him. I sank into my chair, letter clutched in my hand, and finally allowed myself to feel the full magnitude of what had been taken from me. Not just money or security, but something far more precious, the truth about my own family. The chance to grieve my son properly. Years that could have been spent honoring his memory instead of being manipulated by strangers wearing his identity like a costume. The sobs that tore through me were raw, primal things. 15 years of delayed grief compressed into minutes of breathless agony. I cried for Kevin, for Linda, for the lonely, vulnerable man I had become who had been such easy prey. I'm not sure how long I sat there, but eventually the storm passed, leaving behind an unexpected calm. Grief shared its strange alchemy with me, transforming something sharp and unbearable into something I could, somehow, carry. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Marcus standing on my porch, as promised. "I brought breakfast," he said when I opened the door, holding up a bag from a local bakery. "And company, if that's okay." Behind him stood a woman in her 70s, smartly dressed with silver hair and alert, kind eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, this is my grandmother's sister, Eleanor. She went through something similar last year, after my grandmother passed. I thought you might want to talk to someone who understands." Eleanor stepped forward, extending her hand. "They got my retirement and my house before I realized what was happening. Different faces, same script. May I come in?" That morning, over coffee and pastries, Eleanor shared her story, the charming nephew who had appeared after her sister's funeral, the whirlwind romance with a woman who became his accomplice, the gradual isolation from friends and family, the episodes of confusion that were actually side effects from medication slipped into her food. "The hardest part wasn't the money," she said, stirring her coffee. "It was the shame. How could I have been so stupid? So blind? I'm an educated woman. I taught high school English for 40 years. I should have known better." Her words resonated deeply. The same questions had been circling in my mind since yesterday. "How did you move past it?" I asked. Eleanor's smile was gentle but determined. "First, I got angry. Really, properly angry, not just at them, but at a world that sees the elderly as disposable, as easy targets. Then I got practical. I worked with the police, with my bank, with lawyers. I fought for every penny I could recover." She leaned forward. "But most importantly, I refused to let them take my dignity along with my savings. I refused to hide in shame." Marcus, who had been quietly listening, added, "She started a support group. for other victims and their families. Eleanor nodded. We meet twice a month. Share resources, strategies for recovery. Sometimes just share the burden of what happened to us. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. You be welcome there, Brian. Very welcome. That afternoon, after they left, I found myself drawn to a task I had been avoiding for years, Linda's studio at the back of the house. After her death, I had closed the door and rarely entered, unable to face the tangible reminders of her absence. The imposters had respected this boundary, likely sensing it was too sacred a space to invade without raising suspicions. The room was exactly as she had left it, easel positioned by the window to catch the northern light, paintbrushes in mason jars, half-finished canvases leaning against the walls. Linda had been a talented amateur artist, finding time for her passion despite working full-time as a nurse. The space smelled faintly of linseed oil and the lavender sachets she kept in drawers. In one corner stood a large metal filing cabinet where she had meticulously organized family documents, birth certificates, insurance policies, property deeds, wills. Linda had always been the organized one, the planner. Someone has to think ahead, she would say with a smile. I pulled open the bottom drawer and found what I was looking for, a thick folder labeled Kevin. Inside were report cards, school projects, photographs, letters from his brief time in college before he decided to move west to find himself. And there, in a sealed envelope I had never opened, the last letter he had sent before his death, a letter I hadn't known was his final communication. With reverent hands, I opened it and began to read. Dad, I know it's been too long since I called. Things got complicated out here, and I didn't want to worry you and Mom. But I'm sorting it out. California is beautiful in ways I never expected. The light here is different somehow. Clearer. I think I understand why Mom loves painting so much now. I've been thinking about coming home for a visit. Not for good, I'm not ready for that yet, but to see you both, to show you I'm okay. I miss Sunday dinners and Dad's terrible jokes. I even miss the humidity, if you can believe that. Tell Mom I'm sorry I missed her birthday. I'll make it up to her next month. I promise. Love, Kevin. The letter was dated just 3 days before the accident that took his life. He had been planning to come home. To reconcile. To build a bridge across the distance that had grown between us after heated arguments about his future, his choices. But that reunion never happened. Instead, years later, an imposter walked into my life wearing my grief like a key to unlock my trust. I carefully returned the letter to its envelope and closed the drawer. But instead of leaving the studio, I found myself drawn to Linda's easel. On impulse, I unwrapped a fresh canvas from the stack she had left. Found a pencil. Began to sketch awkwardly. I had no artistic talent, but that didn't matter now. I sketched the outline of our family, Linda, Kevin, myself, as we had been in happier times. The strokes were clumsy, the proportions wrong, but somehow the act of creation felt like a declaration. These were my people. My true family. No one could steal them from me, not really. As twilight gathered outside the windows, my phone rang again. Detective Simmons. Mr. Mitchell, we have some potentially good news. The district attorney has frozen several offshore accounts connected to the Turners. There's a chance, I don't want to promise too much, but there's a chance we might be able to recover some of your assets. How much? I asked, not daring to hope. We won't know for some time. These cases are complicated, but they were sloppy this time, perhaps getting overconfident. They left more financial tracks than in previous cases. After we hung up, I stood at the window watching darkness settle over Memphis. The city lights began to twinkle against the night sky, each one a small defiance against the encroaching dark. Somewhere out there, the Mississippi continued its eternal journey to the sea, carrying away the day's troubles. I thought of Eleanor's words about dignity, about refusing to hide in shame. Taking out my phone, I scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in too long, James, my brother. We had spoken briefly last night, but there was so much more to say, so many years to bridge. "James," I said when he answered, "I've been thinking. Would you want to come visit for a while? There's someone I'd like you to meet tomorrow. A support group. And after that, well, I think it's time I told you everything about Kevin. The real Kevin. Our Kevin." As I spoke, I felt something shift inside me, the first tender shoots of healing breaking through hard-packed soil. The road ahead would be long and difficult. Financial recovery uncertain. Emotional recovery even more challenging. But for the first time since Linda's death, I wasn't walking that road completely alone. The imposters had sought to isolate me, to cut me off from human connection until I was completely dependent on their false care. Their greatest weapon hadn't been their cunning or their drugs, but the loneliness they exploited and deepened. And perhaps, I thought as I looked at my crude family sketch, the way forward wasn't just through legal proceedings and financial recovery. Perhaps it was also through reclaiming those connections. Rebuilding a life with room for both grief and joy, for both memories and new possibilities. Outside, a summer storm was gathering, lightning occasionally illuminating the Memphis skyline. I made myself a proper dinner, simple but nourishing, no hidden ingredients, and sat at my kitchen table. Alone, but somehow not as lonely as before. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, police interviews, bank meetings, difficult conversations. But it would also bring Eleanor's support group. James's visit. Small steps toward reclaiming not just my financial security, but my place in the world. The imposters had nearly succeeded in erasing me, in making Brian Mitchell disappear into a fog of confusion and manipulation, leaving nothing but empty accounts and a false paper trail. But they had failed. I was still here, still remembering, still fighting, still me. The morning after my conversation with James dawned with a gentle rain tapping against the windows, as if Memphis itself was washing away the remnants of deception that had clung to my life. I stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, real coffee, brewed the way I liked it, and watched droplets trace jagged paths down the glass. Each one seemed to carry away a small piece of the fog that had surrounded me for so long. My brother would arrive tomorrow. The thought filled me with both anticipation and dread. We hadn't seen each other in nearly 3 years, another casualty of the impostor's careful isolation campaign. What would he see when he looked at me? A foolish old man who had been so desperate for connection that he'd welcomed wolves into his home? Or simply his brother, wounded but still standing? The kitchen phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Detective Simmons again, her voice carrying an unfamiliar tension. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask you something important. Did the Turners ever mention associates? Other people working with them?" A chill ran through me despite the warm coffee in my hands. "Not directly." "Why?" "Your neighbor reported someone watching your house last night. A car parked across the street for several hours. When patrol officers approached, it drove away." The kitchen suddenly felt colder, the rain outside more ominous than cleansing. "Jason, the fake Kevin, mentioned friends when they arrested him," I said slowly. "Said they could find me. I thought it was just threats, empty words." "It probably is," Detective Simmons reassured me, but I could hear the professional concern beneath her calm tone. "But we're increasing patrols in your area, just to be safe. And Mr. Mitchell? Maybe consider staying with someone for a few days, at least until we're sure." After she hung up, I stood by the window, scanning the quiet street. Nothing seemed out of place, just the usual neighborhood on a rainy Memphis morning. Children in colorful raincoats waiting for school buses. A postal worker making early deliveries, hunched against the drizzle. Everything normal. And yet, the Turners, or whatever their real names were, hadn't worked alone. Marcus had confirmed they were part of a larger network that targeted vulnerable seniors across multiple states. What if their friends believed I still had access to accounts, to information that could compromise others in their organization? Fear, cold and familiar, began to creep back into my consciousness. It would be so easy to surrender to it, to become again the anxious, dependent old man they had carefully cultivated. To doubt my own perceptions, my own strength. I set down my coffee cup with a decisive click against the countertop. No. I would not be driven from my home, would not return to living in fear. I had survived their psychological warfare, their gaslighting, their attempts to erase my identity. I would not cower now. Instead, I picked up my phone and made a call, not to James, not to the police, but to Eleanor. "I need to come to the support group today," I said when she answered. "Not just to listen, to speak." 3 hours later, I found myself in the community room of a local church, seated in a circle with 11 other seniors. Each face told its own story of betrayal and resilience, some still bearing the shadows of recent trauma, others carrying the hard-won light of healing. Eleanor made the introductions, her hand resting supportively on my shoulder. "This is Brian," she said simply. "He's one of us." One of us. Those 3 words held more comfort than any platitude could have offered. Here were people who understood without explanation, who recognized the particular pain of having trust weaponized against them. When my turn came to speak, the words came haltingly at first, then in a rush, like a river breaking through a dam. I told them everything: Linda's death, my isolation, the false Kevin's return, the slow erosion of my independence, the drug tea, the financial devastation, the discovery of my real son's death, and finally, the confrontation and arrests. As I spoke, I watched their faces. Not pity, something far more valuable. Recognition. Validation. The silent acknowledgement that said, "We believe you. We know this pain. You are not alone in this." A woman named Margaret, elegant in her 80s with carefully coiffed silver hair, leaned forward when I mentioned the threatening car outside my house. "They did the same to me," she said, her voice soft but steel-edged. "After the arrests. Strange calls. Unfamiliar cars. It's their last attempt to control through fear." She straightened in her chair. "I installed security cameras. Joined a neighborhood watch. Started taking self-defense classes designed for seniors." A small, fierce smile. "I refused to be a victim twice." Others shared their stories, financial recoveries, legal victories, emotional healing, and the practical steps they had taken to reclaim their security and dignity. They offered resources, referrals, solidarity. A man named Richard, a retired judge who had lost nearly everything to a caregiver scheme, handed me his card. "I mentor victims through the legal recovery process," he explained. "Pro bono. It's how I fight back." As the meeting concluded, Eleanor introduced me to a younger man standing quietly at the back of the room, Officer Davis, a police liaison specialized in elder fraud cases. "Your neighbor was right to be concerned," he confirmed. "But we don't think you're in physical danger. These networks typically avoid violence. It brings too much heat. They prefer psychological intimidation to keep victims silent or compliant." "What should I do?" I asked. "Live your life," he said simply. "That's the best defiance. But take precautions. We can help with that." By the time I left the church, the rain had stopped, and weak sunshine was breaking through the clouds. The world seemed simultaneously more dangerous and safer than it had that morning. Dangerous because I now fully understood the extent of the network that had targeted me. Safer because I was no longer facing it alone. That afternoon, Officer Davis and a security consultant arrived at my house. We walked the property together, identifying vulnerabilities, discussing practical improvements. Motion sensor lights. Upgraded locks. A simple security system. A camera for the front door. Nothing fortress-like, Officer Davis explained. The goal isn't to live in fear, but to remove easy opportunities. As they worked, I found myself in Linda's studio again, drawn to the unfinished family portrait I had awkwardly begun. On impulse, I took out my phone and called the law firm from the letter about Kevin's insurance policy. "This is Brian Mitchell," I said when a secretary answered. "I recently discovered a letter about my late son, Kevin Mitchell." The process was surprisingly straightforward, perhaps because I now had documentation of the fraud, perhaps because the universe occasionally balances its scales. By the end of the call, I had confirmation that a modest insurance payout, $50,000 that Kevin had never mentioned to me, would be processed within weeks. Not enough to replace what had been stolen, but enough for a new beginning. Enough to honor his memory properly. When the security team left, I sat on my porch swing, watching the street with new awareness. A car drove by slowly, and I felt my muscles tense, but it was just Mrs. Abernathy from 3 doors down, returning from her weekly bridge game. She waved, and I waved back, realizing I had barely spoken to my neighbors in months. The imposters had subtly discouraged such interactions, painting neighbors as intrusive, nosy. Another connection severed that needed repairing. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Flight lands 11:35 tomorrow. Can't wait to see you, big brother." I smiled at the message, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. Big brother. A role, an identity, a connection that the Turners couldn't erase, couldn't fabricate, couldn't steal. That evening, as I prepared a simple dinner, the doorbell rang. Through the newly installed security camera, I could see Marcus standing on my porch, holding a paper bag. "My grandmother always said food is medicine," he explained, handing me the bag containing containers of homemade gumbo and cornbread. "She meant it literally. After what happened with the Turners, you need clean food you can trust." I invited him in, and over dinner, I shared what I'd learned at the support group. He listened intently, occasionally adding insights from his grandmother's experience. "The hardest part for her was the shame," he said, echoing Eleanor's words. "She was so embarrassed that she nearly didn't report it. Kept saying she should have known better. As if wisdom and experience should somehow make us immune to professional predators," I replied, surprising myself with the heat in my voice. "We don't expect bank tellers to feel ashamed when they're robbed at gunpoint. Why should we feel ashamed for being targeted by criminals who spent months studying how to manipulate us?" Marcus nodded slowly. "That's exactly what the detective told my grandmother. That feeling ashamed was playing into their hands. It's how they silence victims." After he left, I stood in the doorway of what had been Kevin's room, seeing it clearly for what it was, a stage set designed to support their deception. His clothes still hung in the closet. Family photos he had fabricated sat on the dresser. Books he pretended to have read lined the shelves. Tomorrow, James would help me clear it all out. Reclaim the space. Perhaps convert it into something new. A proper guest room, maybe, or a study where I could explore interests the imposters had gradually taken from me. But tonight, I had one more task. At my desk, I opened my laptop, a device the false Melissa had gradually convinced me was too complicated for me to use without her help. I navigated to an email account I hadn't accessed in months, created a new message, and began to type. To the members of the First Memphis Senior Center Chess Club. It has been too long since I joined you for our Thursday meetings. Life took an unexpected turn, but I'm finding my way back. If the invitation still stands, I would very much like to return next week. With warm regards, Brian Mitchell. My finger hesitated over the send button for just a moment. A reflexive fear, a whisper of the self-doubt they had so carefully nurtured. What if the club had forgotten me? What if they asked questions I wasn't ready to answer? Then I thought of Eleanor standing tall despite everything taken from her. Of Margaret taking self-defense classes in her 80s. Of Richard using his legal knowledge to help others fight back. I pressed send. That night, as I prepared for bed, I realized I had moved through the entire evening without once thinking about the special tea that had been part of my nightly routine for so long. The false Melissa had insisted it would help me sleep, would calm my anxiety she and her partner had deliberately created and then medicated to keep me compliant. Instead, I made myself a cup of regular chamomile, Linda's favorite evening drink, and stood at the bedroom window, looking out at the Memphis night. Security lights illuminated the yard in gentle pools, not harsh enough to disturb, but sufficient to remove the deep shadows where fear could hide. In the distance, I could see the glow of downtown, hear the faint sound of a passing train, the city continuing its life, indifferent to individual dramas, but somehow comforting in its constancy. This was my home, my city, my life. And I was reclaiming every part of it, one small act of courage at a time. Dawn broke over Memphis with golden fingers of light stretching across the Mississippi, touching the city awake. I stood at my kitchen window, watching as the world transitioned from gray shadows to vibrant color, much like my own life was slowly doing. James would be arriving in just a few hours, my brother, my blood, a connection to the past that the imposters hadn't managed to completely sever. The coffee maker gurgled softly, filling the kitchen with the rich aroma of fresh brew. Such a simple pleasure, making coffee exactly how I liked it. No one hovering, suggesting it was too strong for my condition. No one counting the cups, warning about my heart problems that had never existed before they invented them. My phone chimed with a text message from Detective Simmons. Turners denied bail. Too much flight risk. Trial date being set. You should be safe. Safe. Such a simple word for such a complex feeling. Physical safety was just the beginning of what had been stolen from me, and what I was now reclaiming, piece by careful piece. The doorbell camera app on my phone showed a delivery driver leaving a package on my front porch. Another small sign of my reentry into the normal world, ordering books online myself, using my own accounts, making choices without interference or manipulation. I retrieved the package, a book on grief recovery and another on financial fraud protection. Knowledge is armor, understanding is weapon. The support group had recommended both. As I settled at the kitchen table with my coffee and one of the books, my mind drifted to the meeting with the district attorney scheduled for next week. They wanted me to testify about what the Turners had done, not just to me, but potentially in other cases where victims were too frightened or too ashamed to come forward. The thought of facing them in court, of speaking my truth while they sat watching, sent a cold ripple down my spine. But Eleanor's words echoed in my memory. Your voice is the thing they tried hardest to take from you. Using it is the greatest act of defiance. The morning passed in quiet preparation, changing sheets in the guest room for James, tidying spaces that had been neglected during my fog of manipulation and drugging. Each small domestic act felt like reclamation, like drawing a line in sand. This is my home. Mine alone. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number with a California area code. For a moment, old anxieties flared. The imposters had convinced me to avoid answering calls from numbers I didn't recognize, another way of controlling my connections to the outside world. I took a deep breath and answered. Mr. Mitchell? This is Sarah Lawson from Pacific Heritage Insurance. I'm following up on our conversation about your son Kevin's policy. The woman's voice was professional but kind, with no trace of the false sympathy the Turners had perfected. We spent 20 minutes going through details, documentation needed, timeline for processing, legal considerations given the unusual circumstances. I have to ask, she said near the end of our call, how did you only recently learn about your son's passing? The accident was 15 years ago. I hesitated, the shame rising automatically before I consciously pushed it back down. It's a long story involving criminal fraud, I said finally. I was targeted, isolated. The notification never reached me, and when it finally did years later, it was intercepted. A pause on the line. I'm so sorry, Mr. Mitchell. I don't even have words. Neither did I for a long time, I replied. But I'm finding them now. After the call, I found myself drawn again to Linda's studio. The unfinished family portrait still stood on the easel, my clumsy attempt to recapture something the Turners had tried to erase. With hesitant hands, I picked up a paintbrush, Linda's paintbrush, and dipped it into a pot of blue paint the color of Kevin's eyes. My real Kevin's eyes. I had no artistic talent. The brush felt awkward in my fingers, the strokes uneven and childlike. But something about the act of creation, of making visible what had been hidden, felt necessary and right. I wasn't painting for anyone else to see. I was painting to remember, to honor, to reclaim. I was still there, blue paint somehow smudged on my cheek and forehead, when the security app chimed. A taxi was pulling into my driveway. James had arrived. Opening the door to my brother was like opening a door to a past that predated all the deception. James, 5 years younger, more gray in his beard than I remembered, lines around his eyes that spoke of his own griefs, stood on my porch with a small suitcase and uncertainty in his expression. "Brian," he said, his voice catching slightly. "God, it's been too long." The embrace that followed broke something inside me, some final wall I hadn't realized I was still maintaining. We stood there on the porch, two aging men holding each other, as if we were boys again, hiding from a storm in our childhood home in rural Tennessee. "I'm sorry," Jane said as we finally separated, both wiping our eyes with embarrassed little gestures. "I should have pushed harder when you stopped calling. When the Christmas cards got so impersonal. I knew something wasn't right. You couldn't have known," I assured him as we went inside. "They were professionals. They made sure to keep me away from anyone who might recognize that Kevin wasn't really Kevin." In the living room, surrounded by family photos the Turners had carefully curated to support their narrative, I finally told James the complete story, not the abbreviated version from our phone call, but every painful detail. The manipulations, the gaslighting, the drugs, the slow, methodical erasure of my independence. "And the real Kevin?" James asked quietly when I finished. "You're certain?" In answer, I showed him the letter from California, the newspaper clipping Marcus had found, the insurance documents. James read each one carefully, his hands trembling slightly. "I remember when he left for California," he said finally. "You were so angry. Said he was throwing his life away, chasing dreams instead of stability. The last real conversation we had was a fight," I admitted, the old guilt rising fresh and sharp. "I said things a father should never say to a son." Jane set the papers down and looked at me directly. "And you never got to make it right." "No," I whispered. "And then these people, they stole even the chance to properly greet him, to honor who he really was, not their twisted version." My brother's eyes held a deep understanding that no one else, not the police, not the support group, not even Eleanor, could fully share. He had known the real Kevin, had been his uncle, had shared our family history. "Then that's what we do now," he said with quiet determination. "We honor him, the real him." That afternoon, James helped me begin the painful process of sorting through Kevin's room, separating the fabricated evidence of a life never lived from the few genuine mementos of my actual son that remained. Each item required careful examination, painful questions. Is this real? Is this a prop in their elaborate production? Is this something that belonged to my actual son? In the closet, we found a box the Turners had hidden, containing research about our family. Old photographs they had studied to create their deception. Notes about family stories, traditions, inside jokes they could reference to solidify their disguise. Seeing our intimate history reduced to study materials for criminals felt like another violation, another theft of something precious. They were thorough, James said grimly, examining their notes. Look, they even researched Dad's Navy stories, Mom's favorite recipes. What kind of people do this? I asked, the question that had haunted me since that day in the phone repair shop. Not just take money, but steal identities. Lives. James had no answer. Perhaps there was none that could truly make sense of such calculated cruelty. By late afternoon, we had filled several trash bags with the false Kevin's belongings, clothes, books, personal items that had only ever been props in an elaborate con. The room looked strangely empty, awaiting a new purpose. What will you do with this space now? James asked as we stood in the doorway, surveying our work. I'm not sure yet, I admitted. But something new. Something true. As evening approached, James insisted on cooking dinner, another simple pleasure returning, eating food prepared by trusted hands. Over pasta and wine, our conversation gradually shifted from the immediate trauma of the Turners to older memories, to the family we had been before grief and distance had created space for imposters to exploit. Remember that 4th of July when Kevin set off fireworks too close to Mr. Abernathy's shed? James asked, laughing. And Linda just stood there with the garden hose, cool as could be, putting out little fires while you chased Kevin around the yard? I did remember. A perfect summer evening, lightning bugs rising from the grass, my son's face both terrified and thrilled by the minor chaos he had created. The memory, untouched by the Turners' manipulation, felt like a treasure recovered from a sunken ship. He had her calm in a crisis, I said, smiling at the recollection, and my knack for getting into trouble. As night fell over Memphis, James and I moved to the porch swing, the same swing where Linda and I had spent countless evenings, where the real Kevin had nervously told us about his plans to move to California, where I had later sat alone in grief after her death. The security lights cast a gentle glow over the yard. Somewhere down the street, children were laughing. A car drove past slowly, just a neighbor returning home, not a threat, not a shadow from the Turners' organization. What happens now, Brian? James asked softly. After the trial, after all this is over, will you stay in Memphis? I looked out at the neighborhood I had called home for decades, considering the question seriously. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. This house, it holds so much. Good and bad. Linda, the real Kevin, but also what they did to me here. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently, before James spoke again. Whatever you decide, you're not alone anymore. I let distance grow between us once. I won't make that mistake again. The simple promise, you're not alone, contained more healing power than all the security systems, all the legal proceedings, all the financial recoveries combined. In the end, this was what the Turners had tried hardest to steal: connection, community, the knowledge that I belonged somewhere to someone. As night deepened around us, fireflies began to appear in the yard, tiny lights against the darkness, each one a small, temporary miracle. Like the genuine memories returning through the fog of deception. Like the authentic connections being rebuilt, one conversation at a time. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more sorting through lies, more legal complexities, more emotional reckonings. But tonight, on this porch, with my brother beside me and the Memphis summer wrapping around us like a familiar blanket, I felt something I had almost forgotten. I felt at home in my own life. 6 months after the Turners entered my life for the last time, I stood alone on the banks of the Mississippi as dawn painted the water in shades of amber and gold. The Memphis air carried the first hint of autumn, a gentle cooling that whispered of change and new beginnings. I'd taken to these early morning walks as part of my healing, finding solace in watching the ancient river that had witnessed countless human dramas yet continued its eternal journey without judgment. Today was different, though. Today marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. In 3 hours, I would sit in a courtroom and face the people who had nearly destroyed me. The trial of Jason and Rebecca Turner, those weren't their real names either, as we eventually discovered, had been delayed by legal maneuvering, psychiatric evaluations, and the complex process of connecting their crimes across multiple states. But finally, justice was within reach. The district attorney had called yesterday with news. Faced with overwhelming evidence, they were considering a plea deal. They wanted to hear my thoughts. "It's your decision, Mr. Mitchell," she had said. "A plea means no trial, but guaranteed prison time. It means you won't have to testify, won't have to relive everything in public. But some victims feel cheated without their day in court." I had promised to give my answer this morning, after one last night, to consider what justice truly meant to me. The river carried a fallen leaf past me, swirling it in gentle eddies before drawing it into the current. I watched it disappear downstream, thinking about how we mark endings and beginnings in our lives. About the nature of closure, that elusive feeling we chase after trauma. "What would you advise, Linda?" I whispered to the morning air, a habit I'd fallen into during these solitary walks. Sometimes, in the quality of light or the particular song of a mourning dove, I imagined I could sense her response. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a text from James, heading to the courthouse at 9. "Call if you need anything, big brother." James had extended his visit for 2 weeks after that first night, helping me sort through the physical and emotional debris the Turners had left behind. He returned to his home in Nashville afterward, but drove down to Memphis every other weekend. Our relationship, once strained by distance and unspoken grief, had found new strength in this shared crisis. The support group had become a cornerstone of my recovery as well. Eleanor, with her fierce dignity. Margaret, taking self-defense classes in her 80s. Richard, channeling his legal expertise into helping other victims navigate the system. We met twice monthly, sharing small victories and setbacks, resources and revelations. 3 weeks ago, I had found myself in the unfamiliar position of welcoming a newcomer, a retired engineer named Howard whose nephew had systematically emptied his accounts while acting as his caregiver. I recognized in Howard's hunched shoulders and downcast eyes the same shame that had nearly suffocated me in those early days. "The hardest part," I told him during that meeting, "isn't the money. It's trusting your own perceptions again, believing you're worthy of better." "But you are?" "We all are." My words had surprised me, not their truth, but the steady conviction with which I delivered them. Somewhere along the way, the healing I spoke of had become real, not just an aspiration. The financial recovery had been slower, more complex. Some of my assets were gone forever, disappeared into offshore accounts, or converted to untraceable cryptocurrency. But Detective Simmons and the Financial Crimes Unit had managed to freeze and recover nearly 40% of what was stolen. Combined with Kevin's insurance policy and some careful restructuring of my remaining investments, I had enough for a modest but secure future. The house remained my greatest question mark. Every room held memories, both beautiful and painful, authentic and manufactured. Some days, I couldn't imagine leaving the home where Linda and I had built our life together. Other days, the weight of what had happened within those walls felt suffocating. The realtor's card sat on my kitchen counter, neither accepted nor rejected. Another decision awaiting clarity. As the sun rose fully over the river, I made my way back through Tom Lee Park toward my car. The courthouse awaited. Whatever I decided about the plea deal, I needed to look them in the eyes one more time, not as victims and predators, but as human beings making choices within the moral universe we all inhabit. The downtown courthouse was a monument to institutional solidity, granite and marble designed to inspire confidence in the mechanisms of justice. I found James waiting on the steps, dressed in the dark suit he usually reserved for weddings and funerals. Eleanor was there too, along with Richard from the support group. Their presence steadied me as we made our way through security, up elevators, down echoing hallways. The district attorney, a focused woman named Helen Garcia with kind eyes and a voice that commanded attention, greeted us in a small conference room. "They're being brought up now," she explained. "Before you give your decision about the plea, I thought you might want to hear what they're offering." I nodded, not trusting my voice in that moment. James squeezed my shoulder, a silent affirmation of support. When they entered, flanked by court officers and their lawyers, I felt an unexpected calm descend. The false Kevin, Jason Turner, or whatever his real name might be, looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the circumstances of our meeting. The woman who had played Melissa no longer bothered maintaining her previously impeccable appearance. Her eyes, once calculatingly warm, now darted nervously around the room. These were the people who had studied my life, infiltrated my home, drugged my food, gaslighted me into doubting my own mind, and planned to discard me once they'd extracted everything of value. Yet looking at them now, I felt something unexpected, not forgiveness, exactly, but a certain clarity. They were broken people who broke others. Their actions revealed their character, not mine. "Mr. Mitchell," their lead attorney began, "my clients wish to express their deep remorse for the harm they've caused you and other victims. As part of their plea agreement, they're prepared to provide detailed information about their network, information that could help authorities identify and protect other potential victims." I studied their faces as the lawyer spoke. The man looked at the table, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. The woman watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read, calculation, perhaps, or genuine regret. It didn't really matter. "They're also willing to forfeit all remaining assets to a victim restitution fund," the lawyer continued. "In exchange, the state has offered a sentence of 15 years with the possibility of parole after 10. 15 years. A substantial portion of whatever life remained to them. Justice in numeric form. Days, months, years tallied against the immeasurable harm they'd caused. District Attorney Garcia turned to me. "Mr. Mitchell, you're not obligated to agree to this arrangement. If you prefer to proceed to trial, we're fully prepared to do so." Everyone in the room watched me, waiting. The weight of the decision pressed upon my shoulders, not just for myself, but for the other victims these people had harmed, for those who might be protected if their network was exposed. "I have one question," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "Not for the lawyers. For them." The district attorney hesitated, then nodded. I looked directly at the man who had claimed to be my son, who had studied photos of my dead child to better mimic his mannerisms. "The real Kevin, my actual son, died thinking I was angry with him. Our last conversation was an argument." My voice caught slightly, but I continued. "When you decided to become him, did you know that? Did you use that pain deliberately?" A heavy silence filled the room. His attorney started to speak, but the man raised his hand slightly. "Yes," he said finally, his voice barely audible. I researched estrangements. They're useful for explaining long absences." The simple, terrible truth of it, the calculated exploitation of one of my deepest regrets, should have devastated me. Instead, it felt like the final confirmation I needed. The final severance of any lingering confusion about who these people were and what they had done. I turned to District Attorney Garcia. I accept the plea deal on one condition. I want to make a victim impact statement. I want it on record what they did, not just to me, but to the memory of my son, to my family's history. She nodded. That can be arranged. And Mr. Mitchell? Their information about other potential victims. It could save lives. 2 hours later, I stood in a courtroom and gave that statement. I spoke not as a broken man, but as a witness to both cruelty and resilience. I named every manipulation, every lie, every theft, both financial and emotional. I spoke of Kevin, the real Kevin, whose memory deserved better than to become a disguise for predators. I spoke of Linda, whose absence had created the vulnerability these people exploited. And I spoke of what comes after such a betrayal, the painstaking process of reclaiming trust, identity, and purpose. You didn't just steal my money, I concluded, looking directly at the Turners. You tried to steal my story. You failed. That evening, I returned home to find James and Eleanor waiting on my porch with takeout from my favorite barbecue place and a bottle of good bourbon. We ate on the porch swing as dusk settled over Memphis, talking not about the trial or the Turners, but about the future. I've made a decision about the house, I told them as the first stars appeared. I'm selling it. James nodded slowly. Where will you go? Not far, I said. There's a small place near the river I looked at last week. Needs some work, but it has good bones. And a sunroom that would make a perfect art studio. Eleanor smiled. You're taking up painting? Not exactly, I explained. But Kevin, the real Kevin, he had artistic talent that he never fully explored. In those last months in California, he was starting to paint. The insurance investigator found photos. I took a deep breath. I'm thinking of creating a small foundation in his name. Something to help young artists who can't afford supplies or classes. The idea had come to me during my morning walk by the river, a way to honor both what was and what might have been. A way to create meaning from loss. It won't be large, I continued, but it will be real. Something good growing from all of this. Later that night, after James and Eleanor had left, I found myself once more in Linda's studio. The unfinished family portrait still stood on the easel, my clumsy attempt to recapture what had been stolen. I studied it in the soft lamplight, seeing both its imperfections and its heart. I wouldn't finish it. Some things remain incomplete, and there's a certain honesty in accepting that. Instead, I carefully wrapped it in tissue paper, a memento of this particular journey, not the destination. Tomorrow would bring new tasks. Contacting the realtor, meeting with a lawyer about the foundation, continuing the slow process of rebuilding financial security. The future stretched before me, not the comfortable retirement I had once anticipated, but something different. Something I was creating with open eyes and hard-won wisdom. Outside, the Memphis night wrapped around the house like a familiar blanket. From somewhere down the street came the sound of children laughing, of life continuing its imperfect, precious course. The security lights cast gentle pools of illumination across the yard, pushing back the darkness. I was 71 years old. I had lost a wife to cancer and a son to distance, then accident. I had been targeted, manipulated, betrayed in the most intimate ways possible. I had nearly lost everything. Yet standing there in the quiet house, I felt the truth of what Eleanor had told me months ago in the support group. They can take your money, your security, even temporarily your trust in yourself. But they cannot take who you truly are unless you surrender it. I hadn't surrendered. And in that perseverance lay not just survival, but a kind of victory. If this story moved you, please share it and subscribe for more real stories like mine. Thank you for listening.